What if everything you thought you knew about the Bible was incomplete?
Not long ago, a massive wildfire spread throughout this area, and while the flames scorched the excavation site, it also revealed something extraordinary: hidden parts of this biblical village unseen for nearly 2,000 years.
We've been uncovering amazing remains of a Byzantine church complex. The church covers an area of about 1.5 dunams.
For 15 centuries, mud along the shores of Galilee protected a secret that history was never meant to find. Scholars believed every word Jesus ever spoke had been captured, sealed inside the pages of Scripture, complete and unchanging. But that assumption may have been catastrophically wrong. In 2017, archaeologists peeled away layers of waterlogged earth and uncovered something that shouldn't exist, a message preserved not in parchment, but in stone. A direct command from Jesus to Peter, a command no gospel ever recorded. These aren't just missing words, they're words that challenge the very foundation of Christianity itself. And the question isn't just what they say, it's why they were left out. Stay with me, because what you're about to discover will change how you see the Bible forever. The Lost City. Before we reveal what was written in that stone, you need to understand where it was found, because the location itself is part of the mystery. Have you ever heard of Bethesda? If you know the Bible, that name should send chills down your spine. This was the hometown of Peter, Andrew, and Philip, three of Jesus' closest disciples. This was where Jesus healed a blind man with nothing but spit and mud. This was the site of the feeding of the 5,000, one of the most famous miracles ever recorded. In many ways, Bethsaida functioned as ground zero for the entire apostolic movement. But here's where the story gets dark. Bethsaida is also one of only 3 cities that Jesus openly cursed. In Matthew 11, Jesus condemns the city with terrifying words. "Woe to you, Bethsaida." He rebuked it for witnessing miracles, yet refusing to change. He warned that it would be brought down to Hades itself. And here's the chilling part. That curse appears to have worked. By the 4th century, Bethsaida had become a ghost town. It vanished from maps. Roman writers stopped mentioning it. It was as if the ground itself had swallowed the city whole, erasing it from existence. For nearly 2,000 years, no one could agree on where Bethsaida actually stood. 2 locations battled for the title. One was at Tel, a rocky hilltop packed with impressive ruins, but it was miles from the water, too far to make sense as a fishing village. The other was El Araj, a swampy, mosquito-infested shoreline that most scholars dismissed as too insignificant. The debate was vicious. Academic careers were built and destroyed over this question. Entire research teams refused to speak to each other. It became one of biblical archaeology's most bitter feuds. Then, in the crushing heat of a Galilee summer, everything changed. The discovery begins. The excavation at El Araj began with nothing but local legends and desperate hope. For generations, fishermen had whispered strange stories. During severe droughts, they said, carved stones would briefly rise from the water. Some spoke in hushed voices about a massive structure buried deep in the mud, a great house lost to time. Finally, a team of archaeologists decided to take the risk. They weren't searching for treasure. They were hunting for proof that the lost city was real. The work was brutal. The air was thick with the stench of rotting vegetation and waterlogged earth. Pumps ran constantly to prevent lake water from flooding the trenches. Every foot they dug, the water fought back, as if the land itself was protecting something it didn't want found. For weeks, the skeptics seemed right. The team uncovered little more than endless mud, scattered Roman pottery, and crushing disappointment. Morale was collapsing. Funding was running out. Some team members were ready to give up. Then, a volunteer's trowel struck something solid. Not the dull thump of packed soil, but a sharp, unmistakable clang. Metal on stone. The team stopped breathing. They began clearing the area by hand, gently scraping away layers of gray silt. First, a line appeared, then a corner, then a wall. This wasn't a random pile of stones. It was a structure, precise and deliberate, built with perfect 90-degree angles. As the excavation widened, its true scale became impossible to ignore. This was no fisherman's hut. The walls were massive, built to endure centuries. And as they dug deeper, another detail emerged: the unmistakable curve of an apse, the semicircular space where an altar would stand in a church. But this was no ordinary church. Its design was grand, complex, and astonishingly ancient. The structure stood exactly where ancient pilgrims had claimed the house of Peter once stood. For years, historians had dismissed those accounts, calling the pilgrims confused tourists who got lost. They insisted the real site was miles away, but the mud at El Araj was telling a very different story. The mosaic emerges. As the team carefully washed away 15 centuries of grime, something miraculous happened. Color began to bloom beneath their hands. Reds, blues, yellows, golds. A mosaic floor emerged, shockingly intact. One researcher later said it looked like it had been laid just hours ago.
Oh, it's just coming to life. That's unbelievable. My brain is exploding right now.
It looks like it was written just a few hours ago.
It really does.
Not 1,500 years in the past. The very mud everyone assumed would destroy the ruins had done the opposite. It had sealed them like a time capsule, protecting them from weather, looters, and even marching armies. The craftsmanship was breathtaking. Thousands of tiny tiles arranged in intricate geometric patterns, creating medallions and borders with stunning precision. But the greatest discovery wasn't the artistry. It was what lay hidden within those patterns. As conservators removed the final layers of dirt, Greek letters began to emerge from the stone. The team gathered around, hearts pounding. Cameras flashed. An expert in ancient Greek was called in immediately to translate the inscription on site. It opened with a formal dedication to a bishop named Constantine. Nothing unusual there. But then the tone shifted dramatically. The text mentioned Peter, and it didn't refer to him casually. It called him the chief and commander of the heavenly apostles. Let that sink in. Chief, commander. Those aren't gentle religious terms. They're military language, implying rank, hierarchy, a clear chain of command. This wasn't describing Peter as just another disciple. This was describing him as the supreme leader, the one in charge. And here's where things get explosive. The theological earthquake. This inscription strikes at the heart of Christianity's longest-running war, authority. The Catholic Church grounds its entire legitimacy in the belief that Peter was the first pope, the rock upon which the Church was built, holding supreme authority over all believers. Many Protestant traditions violently reject this, arguing Peter was simply a leader among equals, with no special power or position. For centuries, both sides have pointed to the same Bible verses and reached opposite conclusions. The debate has sparked wars, executions, the splitting of entire nations. It's one of the most bitter theological battles in human history. But buried beneath the mud of Peter's own hometown is a text that seems to settle the argument. The people who lived where Peter lived, who walked the same streets, who knew the stories firsthand, they believed he was the supreme commander. Not one leader among many. The leader. The inscription also identifies Peter as the key bearer, pointing directly to Matthew 16:19, where Jesus gives Peter the keys to the kingdom of heaven. But here's what nobody expected. The mosaic doesn't stop at that familiar verse. The team realized the inscription wasn't just a single block of text, it was enclosed within a circular medallion. And inside that border, barely visible, were smaller, fainter letters. They were difficult to make out, worn away by thousands of footsteps over the centuries, or perhaps carved lightly on purpose, meant to be seen only by those who knew to look. To the naked eye, the words were almost invisible. So the researchers brought in advanced imaging equipment. Infrared scanners were deployed to see beneath the grime and damage left by time. When the images appeared on the screen, the entire tent fell silent. The hidden message. What they were seeing was a continuation of the inscription, a quote written as direct speech, words spoken by the Lord Himself to His disciple. Ancient churches often display Bible verses on their walls or floors. That part wasn't unusual, but this text didn't match any known manuscript. It wasn't a standard quotation. It was different. A variation, a deviation, or possibly something even more unsettling. It could have been an earlier version, one that was later edited out. The mood at the excavation changed instantly. This was no longer just an archaeological discovery. The team was staring at what appeared to be a record of a conversation that took place 2,000 years ago, just steps from where they were standing. Piece by piece, linguists reconstructed the broken letters hidden within the faint inner ring of the mosaic. A sentence emerged. It read something like this: "Guard my house, for I go to prepare the heavens." Stop. Read that again. Guard my house. In the Gospel of John, Jesus tells Peter to feed my sheep. In Matthew, he calls him the rock on which the church will be built. But nowhere, and I mean nowhere, in the accepted New Testament does Jesus ever tell Peter to guard my house. And then there's the second part, "For I go to prepare the heavens." We're familiar with a similar verse from John 14:2. "I go to prepare a place for you." But this wording is different, and that difference is everything. It suggests a division of responsibility. Jesus is departing to prepare what comes next, while Peter is left behind as a watchman over what remains. Which raises the obvious question: what exactly is the house? The house of secrets. If this were only a metaphor for the church, the phrase wouldn't be so striking. But remember where this inscription was found. The church was built directly over a house. Peter's house. When archaeologists dug beneath the Byzantine mosaic floor, they hit a layer of destruction. Beneath the church were Roman-era homes. And these weren't elite villas or administrative buildings. They were fishermen's houses. The team uncovered lead net weights, fishing hooks, and coins dating back to the 1st century. This was the Smoking Gun, a fishing village active during the exact years Jesus was alive. But there's one more twist that makes this discovery even more unsettling. The way this church was constructed tells a story, not of chance, but of obsession. The Byzantine builders didn't place the church randomly. They positioned it with extraordinary precision, centering the entire structure over the remains of one specific house. They built protective walls around the original room. They treated the dirt floor of the old house not as rubble, but as a sacred object. Every detail points to the same conclusion. The builders were completely convinced they were standing on the actual home of Peter. Think about what that means. What if the ancient tradition wasn't just that Peter lived here? What if the tradition said that Jesus explicitly told him, "Stay here, protect this place. This is the anchor point"? That idea fits with something scholars call the agrapha, sayings attributed to Jesus that survive in ancient texts but never made it into the Bible. Dozens of these sayings exist. Some are strange. Some are deeply moving. But finding one permanently carved into the floor of a major pilgrimage site gives it extraordinary weight. It suggests the people of Bethesda remembered something the Gospel writers chose not to record. The guardians. The phrase, "guard my house," reshapes how we see Peter's role. It doesn't frame him as an administrator or teacher, it casts him as a protector, A sentinel, someone standing watch. Defense against what? That's where things get dark. In early Christian belief, sacred places weren't peaceful by default. They were battlegrounds. These were locations thought to attract opposition, places where unseen forces pushed back hardest. Demons, according to early tradition, were believed to despise holy ground. So when Jesus tells Peter to guard the house, it may not have been a symbolic role at all. It may have been an assignment, one that went far beyond preaching or leadership, a spiritual duty rooted in protection. This discovery does something else remarkable. It narrows the distance between legend and reality. It grounds the story. It turns abstract ideas like the keys to heaven into something physical and practical. After all, keys are meant to lock and protect a real place. In effect, the mosaic suggests that the earliest believers saw this exact location, this specific stretch of mud in Galilee, as nothing less than heaven's outpost on earth, an embassy. And Peter wasn't just a teacher there. He was the one left in charge, the ambassador told to hold the line until the master returned. But there's still another layer to this story, one that moves beyond history and into the mystical. The idea of preparing the heavens. What does that actually mean? It sounds less like a metaphor and more like construction work, as if heaven itself wasn't finished yet. It suggests that while Peter was holding the line on earth, Christ was actively shaping what came next. Building, preparing, expanding reality itself. That's a far more dynamic vision of the afterlife than what most people hear in church. The pattern. If we take the inscription at face value, "Guard my house, for I go to prepare the heavens," we're forced to ask an uncomfortable question. Why here? Why this exact spot on the planet? There's a theory whispered among unconventional scholars, those willing to look beyond standard teachings. Certain places on Earth act as anchors, points where the physical and spiritual align. As above, so below. It's an ancient idea rooted in Hermetic thought. The material world reflects the spiritual one. But what if that idea is more literal than symbolic? What if Earth's geography isn't just land and water, but a kind of circuitry? And what if some locations function as connection nodes? If Jesus told Peter to guard the house while he went to prepare the heavens, could Bethesda have been understood as one of those nodes? A junction point, a doorway, a bridge between realms. Look at the pattern. This wasn't an ordinary fishing village. It was the center of the impossible. This is where the blind received sight, where crowds were fed from nothing, an event that defies the laws of conservation, where Jesus walked on water, openly challenging gravity itself. Seen through a different lens, something unsettling emerges. The rules of physics seemed thinner here. The barrier between worlds felt fragile. Reality itself appeared flexible, rewritable in real time. So maybe guarding the house was never about protecting a building or even a community. Maybe it was about guarding the breach, keeping a gateway secure. The Gnostic connection. That idea lines up uncomfortably well with the Gnostic writings, the ancient esoteric texts the early church later rejected and destroyed. Many of those texts speak of guardians and gatekeepers, beings assigned to watch the thresholds between light and matter, heaven and the physical world. The mosaic discovered at El Araj may be a surviving fragment of that older, more mystical form of Christianity. A version that didn't survive intact, one that was eventually smoothed over by Rome, reshaped into a safer system of bishops and popes, while the wilder, cosmic elements were buried beneath doctrine, stone, and silence. This discovery forces us to see the apostles differently, not just as teachers in robes, but as participants in something much larger, operators within a cosmic framework. Peter wasn't simply a fisherman who got promoted into leadership. He was the designated one left behind, the sentinel, the guardian entrusted with the keys, not just symbolically to a kingdom, but quite possibly to a doorway, while the master architect went to work on the other side. It suggests the ascension wasn't just a farewell, it was a departure, and someone had to stay behind to guard the threshold. Then comes the chilling detail. The church wasn't destroyed by enemies. An earthquake in the 8th century swallowed it whole, as if the earth itself sealed the secret. For over 1,000 years, Peter's house vanished. Lost, unguarded, or deliberately hidden. Now it has resurfaced. And the timing doesn't feel random. It feels precise. Why it was left out. So here's the question everyone's avoiding. If this saying is real, if Jesus actually spoke these words to Peter, why aren't they in the Bible? The answer may be simpler and more disturbing than you think. The Bible wasn't assembled by divine intervention. It was assembled by committees, human beings with agendas, politics, and power struggles. The Council of Nicaea in 325 AD, the Council of Carthage in 397 AD. These weren't mystical gatherings guided by heavenly light. They were political conventions where bishops argued, debated, and voted on which texts stayed and which were discarded. Hundreds of early Christian writings existed: Gospels, letters, teachings, sayings. Most were destroyed. The ones that survived were chosen because they fit a particular narrative, a particular structure of authority. "Guard my house, for I go to prepare the heavens," is a problematic statement for organized religion. It suggests Jesus left a specific person in charge of a specific location. Not a church hierarchy, not a theological system, but a man guarding a place. That doesn't fit neatly into the institutional model Rome needed. It's too localized, too mystical, too much like the Gnostic traditions they were desperately trying to suppress. So it's entirely possible this saying was known, was circulated, and was deliberately excluded because it didn't serve the narrative the early church was building. The people of Bethsaida remembered it. They carved it into stone, preserving it in the one place it could never be edited out, the floor of a church built over the very house Jesus spoke about. But the earthquake buried it. The city was cursed and forgotten, and for 15 centuries, the secret stayed hidden. Until now. What else is missing? If Jesus gave Peter instructions that never made it into the Bible, what else are we missing? Think about it. The Gospels were written decades after Jesus died. Mark, the earliest, wasn't written until around 70 AD, 40 years after the crucifixion. That's 2 generations. Imagine trying to accurately record conversations from 40 years ago, relying entirely on oral tradition and fading memories. And those are just the Gospels that made it into the canon. We know there were others. The Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Mary, the Gospel of Judas, dozens more, all suppressed, all destroyed, all dismissed as heretical. But what if they contained truths the church couldn't control? The discovery at El Araj proves that oral traditions preserved real information. The people who lived in Bethsaida passed down stories for 500 years before anyone wrote them in stone. Those stories were accurate enough to mark the exact house where Peter lived. So when they carved, "Guard my house, for I go to prepare the heavens," into that floor, they weren't making it up. They were preserving something they believed to be true. Something passed down from the people who were actually there. This isn't just about one missing verse. It's about an entire dimension of early Christianity that's been edited out, smoothed over, sanitized for mass consumption. The cosmic implication. Let's go deeper. The phrase, "I go to prepare the heavens," implies something radical. Heaven wasn't ready yet. Standard Christian teaching presents heaven as eternal, unchanging, already complete before creation. But this inscription suggests the opposite, that after the resurrection, Jesus departed to actively build or prepare the heavens, as if they required construction, expansion, or transformation. That's not a passive afterlife, that's an active cosmology. It aligns with ancient Jewish mysticism, where the heavens are layered, structured, with different realms and functions. It aligns with esoteric Christianity, where Christ is seen as the cosmic architect, literally constructing the framework of the next reality. And if that's true, then Peter's role becomes even more crucial. He's not just waiting for believers to die and go to heaven. He's holding the earthly anchor point while the heavenly counterpart is being built. It's the ultimate asymmetric responsibility. Christ works above, Peter guards below. Two parts of one operation. That's why the keys matter. Keys don't just symbolize authority, they imply a lock, a door, a threshold that must be controlled. Peter isn't just leading a community, he's manning a gateway. And here's the terrifying thought. If that gateway was at Bethesda, and Bethesda was cursed and destroyed, what happened to the gateway? Was it closed, sealed, relocated? Or is it still there, buried beneath the mud, waiting? The silent witnesses. Here's something that will haunt you. The mosaic wasn't the only witness to this saying. As the excavation continued, researchers found graffiti scratched into the walls of the underlying Roman house, the actual dwelling that predated the Byzantine church by centuries. Among the markings were Christian symbols, names of pilgrims, and fragments of prayers. One inscription, barely legible, appears to reference the keeper of the threshold. Another mentions the house that must not fall. These weren't random tourist scratchings. They were left by early Christians who made pilgrimages to this exact spot long before Constantine legalized Christianity, long before it was safe to openly worship. They came in secret, they risked their lives, and they left messages confirming what the Byzantine mosaic would later declare. This place was special. This house was under protection. Someone had been given a sacred duty here. What's staggering is the continuity. For at least 5 centuries, from the 1st century through the construction of the Byzantine Church in the 5th, believers maintained this tradition. They kept the location alive in memory, protected it through persecution, and eventually monumentalized it in stone when they finally had the power to do so. That kind of persistent memory doesn't happen by accident. It happens when people believe something with absolute conviction. When they know, not just through faith, but through handed-down testimony, that what they're protecting is real. And that raises the most unsettling question of all. What if they were right? The modern mystery. The excavation at El Araj continues. New sections of the mosaic are being uncovered. More inscriptions are emerging, but the site is politically sensitive, underfunded, and constantly at risk. After the mosaic was discovered, the team covered it again, not to hide it, but to protect it. The mud that preserved it for 15 centuries is now its best defense against modern damage. Exposure to air, sunlight, and tourists would destroy it within years. So the words are back underground, hidden again, protected, guarded, just like Peter was told to do. The irony is almost poetic. The message about guarding the house has been guarded by the earth itself, revealed only when the time was right, then sealed again until humanity is ready for the full truth. And maybe that's the real message. Maybe this discovery wasn't meant to answer questions. It was meant to raise them, to remind us that the story we've been told is incomplete, that the Bible, as sacred as it is a curated collection, not an exhaustive record, that there are missing pieces, lost chapters, hidden conversations, and that the truth is bigger, stranger, and more mystical than 2,000 years of institutional theology has allowed us to believe. Question: So here's what we're left with. Archaeologists found a church. Inside that church, they found a mosaic. Inside that mosaic, they found words. Words that don't exist in any Bible. Words that describe a cosmic assignment, a guardian left behind to protect a threshold while heaven itself was being prepared. The people who carved those words believed they were true. They believed them enough to build an entire basilica over a single house. They believed them enough to preserve them in stone, knowing it would outlast empires. And now we have to decide what to believe. Is this just a beautiful floor? A piece of creative Christian art with no basis in reality? Or is it evidence that the earliest Christians knew something we've forgotten? That they understood the mission of Christ and the role of Peter in ways that were later edited, suppressed, and buried? The Church has had 2,000 years to tell us what to think, but the stones are finally speaking for themselves, and they're saying something different. Guard my house, for I go to prepare the heavens. 7 words, 15 centuries of silence. One discovery that changes everything. If Jesus gave instructions that never made it into Scripture, what else was left out? What other conversations, other teachings, other cosmic truths were deemed too dangerous, too mystical, too uncontrollable for the institution that claimed to speak in His name? The site is covered again, but the words are out. They can't be unread. They can't be erased. The signal has been sent. The question now isn't whether the Bible is incomplete. It clearly is. The question is, are we ready to hear what was left out? What do you think? Is this proof of missing Scripture, or just an ancient misunderstanding? Tell us in the comments. And if you want more buried history that challenges everything you thought you knew, hit that subscribe button. Because we're just getting started. The stones are speaking. Are you listening?